Time. There are three panelists or persons we've invited to share thoughts on disabilities in arts practice, and that is Sean Lee and Sin Rosenbaum, and Andrea Thompson, who will be here. So welcome. As again, the conversation this time around is around disabilities in artistic practice, and I like to start by honoring the land that we're on, in those spaces and ways that we got here, that this is indigenous land, and I want to call into the space and into this building and into this territory the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which is called the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe peoples, the Mississaugas of the credit. And I want to call into space also the ancestors, those for whom we know as parents as well. I like to broaden my land acknowledgement to include the Western Hemisphere, that the entire Western Hemisphere is and was indigenous land. Being from Jamaica, that beautiful place that is Hamaka in indigenous language, where on the crest of the Jamaican crest, very English crest, is two indigenous bodies for which a space where we can't really trace that indigeneity anymore beyond food. So what does it mean for me as an immigrant in this particular space, working for Sapamo, with migrant populations and racialized populations, to honor not that I've come from somewhere else, but that in that particular space there was also indigenous persons. And to be in this particular space, feeling marginalized at times, but calling my privilege in the arts sector as well as a marginalized person. And knowing that my privilege also includes the fact that there are indigenous persons who do not have the privilege I have as an immigrant to this particular land. So I want to honor all those things, and I want to say welcome. And we've been saying this a lot more recently, is that if you're not going to do an land acknowledgement from the heart, if you're not going to make it meaningful to you, then maybe you should actually think about not doing one until you can think about what it means to have it be heartfelt. Because it's a serious thing. You know, it leads into many things that we're trying to have a conversation about, the reason why we're in the room. And I also want to throw it out there and say, Liz Lerman says it best about turning discomfort into inquiry. If it's unsettling, then maybe inquire why it's unsettling, why it lives in our bodies and in this space in a particular way, and how we can actually then take that inquiry and move something forward, which is also part of this particular panel of convening conversation we're having about disabilities in the arts. I'm very community driven, and so I'm going to start by also going around the room in an anti-clockwise space, because I'm a dancer, and in the traditional space of African dance traditions, we don't go clockwise, because the earth doesn't rotate clockwise. So I'm going to start to my left, and let's do this, community practice, all coming in here. We'll get started. We're starting. We're getting brewing. Your name, maybe your organization who you're representing, and one word that brings you into this particular space, into this particular conversation.
I'm Gabrielle Pegani from Montreal, from the Dancer Transition Resource Center, Montreal office. I will say a word. Love.
My name is Aviva Flexing, and I'm the General Manager at Canadian Dance Assembly, and I'm here to learn and to share with my staff what I take in here. My word? Learn. Too many words.
I'm Russell, and I'm Aaron's friend from Hamilton. And stay cool, man. Stay cool. My word is also love, and I'm gonna honor that it was not changed up because I'm already here now.
My name's Sin from Tangled Disability. Can I use Charles as my word?
My name is Sean, also from Tangled Arts Disability. I think the word I'll go with is disruption.
Hello, I'm Gabriella. I'm here with the DTRC as the Manitoba rep. My word's going to be Brenda. This is I'm here. Nice to meet you all.
My name is Lisa Robinson. I'm here representing the National Ballet of Canada. I'm in charge of education and outreach, and I'm here for engagement. Can I say collaboration? That was 2 words, but.
Bonjour, hello. My name is Danielle. I'm here in terms of my own practice as well as on behalf of the Toronto Indigenous Business Association. And my word is Zakadwin, which is Anishinaabe for love.
I'm Kirsten. I'm here with Cahoots as a performer at Zapamo today. I'm very honored to be here. My word is musical. That's what I mean.
My name is Darren. I'm a co-writer on Gimpy, the music side, and I'm here. I'm going to steal part of your word. I'm here for music.
Hi, I'm Brenda Gorlick from Winnipeg and the outgoing DTRC rep. And I also am here kind of on behalf of SMD, Society of Manitobans with Disabilities, and my word is networking.
My name is Paris Morgan. I'm the director of the Quebec office of the Dancer Transition Resource Center, and my word would be openness.
I'm Veronique McKenzie from Halifax, here with the Dancer Transition Resource Center, and my word is curiosity.
My name is John Jobs-Reed. I'm also representing DTRC, and my word is respect.
Aaron, I'm Russell's friend from Hamilton. I'm here, I'm brought here by Cahoots Theater to help dramaturg Gimpy, and my word is learn.
My name is also Erin. I'm here as a volunteer with Native Earth, and my word is accountability.
My name is Rebecca Cuddy. I am your front of house representative with Native Earth. Thank you all for coming. And my word is a Michif word for reflection, which is walk on the show. Sorry, I just forgot my own name. Feeling the pressure. I'm Nicole McCarthy, and I'm a theater artist and producer, and I'm here because I said I was at a weird conference, and Marjorie was like, come here. My word is why.
Okay. I'm Andrea. I'm with the City of Toronto in Art Services, and my word is learn.
My name is Marjorie. I'm the outgoing artistic director at Cahoots Theater and the incoming artistic director at Theater House Marai. My word is, in a way, impatient.
Sorry, I'm still
It's okay.
What should I say? It was not, yeah,
Come back.
Hi, I'm Sarah Lockheed. I'm the Director of Administration with the Dancer Transition Resource Center, and my word is listen.
Hi, my name is Lara. I'm here with Studio 90, Described and Design Canada, and my word is learn.
I'm Christian with DTRC. I'm friends with Sarah. My word is also curiosity.
I'm Lee Stevens from the Canada Council for the Arts, Ottawa. My word is listen.
I'm Amy Beck, and I work for DanceWorks and the Can Dance Network, and my word is how.
I'm Megan Andrews. I'm newly with the DTRC, and my word is humility.
And Heather Bruce. I'm Director of Member Services, also with the Dancer Transition Resource Center, and that is also curiosity.
And as again, I'm Kevin Wormsley, the sort of moderator of this panel. I think we're all going to be moderating this entire thing. And my word is excited. So before we get into some questions we'll pose to the two panelists that are here, just to start us off in the conversation, I just want to recap some of the beautiful things that we're here to do. We're here because we love to be here to learn and share, because Charles invited someone because someone else loves to disrupt things. But we're here also to foster engagement, collaboration, love through music, musically. We want to hopefully network with openness, curiosity, respect. We want to learn with accountability. We're curious about the reflections and the why, so that we can learn and not be impatient, maybe impatient. We want to listen. We want to learn because curiosity, listening can lead to the how. Through humility, we can also learn that curiosity can be a space of excitement. These are your words. These are your words. And I want to offer them also as, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just introduce yourself in a
It's
word.
really late. My name is Melissa Herendorf. I'm an art teacher at a project I have going at Path School for Arts and Magic. And a word. Wait.
We're excited. You're late. You're welcome. These are what we call our community agreements. There are many things in there, and I want to throw them back into the center of the room that we're honoring these particular things. Either that when we arrive in a space of tension or when we don't know something, that we are curious, that we go back to that curiosity of love, that we really use these things that were just words we thought in the space to really animate the space and to activate the space for the conversation which we will have for the next little bit. There'll be a break in between, you'll get a time to just stretch, and there'll be a disruption in between with a performance, a showcase of an artist for who we have engaged to be a part of this particular process. And I want to be very transparent that process we thought since our last gathering was a really great way of actually igniting more in the conversation. Because we're working and we're talking, and sometimes we just don't have the artistic practice at the center. So we have now been disrupting our panels and conversations with art, because we do work in that sort of sphere all the time. So with that being said, Sean and Sin, the first question is just, could you just talk about what you're doing to promote disability awareness and also artistic practice that involve and is inclusive of disability art?
Do you want to start? I should start. Okay. So I want to go back to your question about, or when you posed one word for us to think about, which I said disruption. And the reason I said disruption was that I think we need to disrupt the ways in which we think about disability. So the spectrum of disability that I'm referring to would be within MAD, deaf, CRIP, neurodiverse communities. And I'll use a lot of terminology from within communities. So, for example, CRIP, it's a reclamation of the word cripple, obviously. And it is a way in which folks have, from the community, have really reclaimed and thought about the ways in which disability, which has historically been something isolated to the body, something isolated to an individual medicalized mindset, can instead be filled with potential for community building and can be thought of as something relational. And so disability arts, to me, when I'm programming, it really has been about how we can disrupt the ways in which we think about disability and how it's been claimed aesthetically as not something individual and in the body, but rather something that we can build community from. And through that, I think about things like accessible curation. I think about the aesthetics of disability and CRIP aesthetics, and how we can use disability as a way in which we can think about a larger onset of the complex embodiment that we face today, and how we can community build through the arts in that way.
Thank you.
Okay. And so myself, it makes sense for Sean to go first, because Sean sort of really deals with the forward-facing, public-facing stuff that we do at Tangled. And I see my job right now as helping create this space in which Sean and all the other people who come into Tangled can then create the art that then goes out and reflects all this great work that's happening in disability arts right now. What I see with my role is that I like to take all the values that are sort of inherent in disability art or disability justice ethos, and then apply that internally into the organization. For me, it's like you can't really create good art if you don't reflect the same values internally. Like the how we make art is just as important as the product in my perspective. And there's a lot of really negative things that organizations sometimes embody, especially in the arts where we have a weird separation between artists and arts administrators, which I don't believe in, but you know, there's a lot of stuff that we've internalized. So my job is to take that, make our space as inclusive, accessible, as open to the people who come in through the door in any capacity as possible. Help Sean, support Sean, and to also help our space cultivate disability identified leaders, which one thing that we can claim right now is that we are 100% of our staff are deaf, mad, or disability identified someplace in that spectrum. And it makes for a very fun, interesting, supportive space.
Thank you. Sin, do you mind, we were most recent on the panel together, and you said something that was really, for me, a beautiful moment, and it was reflective but also grounding, that at some point we all have this, have a disability. Could you just elaborate that sort of conversation here as well?
Well, I guess it's about what you define, I mean, how you define disability, because I mean, have a disability, I mean, I don't really, that's really just a definition of where you draw the line between what helps you access the space or your community versus not. And everybody is just human. It doesn't matter, and I think the example that we used was glasses. Who here has glasses and you consider yourself disabled? Okay, well, what if you didn't have glasses? What if that technology didn't exist? Would you then be disabled in convening with your community? What if the standard out there was that everything was written in 3-point font? I mean, who at that point would be then visually impaired, right? So it's just a matter of where you're defining it. So it's not so much having a disability, it's just questioning what that word means, actually.
Do you mind digging further into that word in terms of the ideas of ability and disability and Sean mentioned these because I think language also then suggests a particular way of how artists or organizations relate to persons with quote unquote disability. Do you mind unpacking that as well?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say that there's an artist we work with, Persimmon Blackbridge, who refers to the relationship between aging and disability as like something really kind of wonky, because everyone knows they're going to age. Aging is an inevitability, and yet disability, which we see as this fracturing of ordinary life, really I think should be thought of as something that is also part of the way in which we imagine life. And that goes back to the ways in which disability is often a sight with no future. And what I mean by that is that when we imagine the potential for disabled futures, it's one fraught with these concepts of a future or a life not worth living. And I think that's a narrative that the mainstream has perpetuated. But if we were to think about using things like access, using things like inclusivity and you know, love that we've thought about, like if we can use those ways to reframe how it is that people can participate in society through things like culture, through things like housing, through support, if we can use these methods to reframe what it is that we are valuing, I think disability arts has this incredible potential for confronting our cultural priorities. Then we can use that as a site from which we jump, and we can use art for its transformative abilities to think about our relationships to disability as something not to be feared, but rather something that can be embraced as part of life. Now, I'm not saying that that you know, I personally wouldn't say I want to be more disabled. What I'm saying is that we want to think about disability as a complexity in which it is inevitable and it is a natural part of life. It shouldn't be this thing that we try to stay devoid from because it can impact all of us. It cuts through every form of oppression, whether or not we acknowledge it or not. And it has been, as a scholar Mia Minga says, it's the root from which oppression has been created. So we can think about historically the ways in which queer folks, for example, were institutionalized as being mentally unfit, and it was justified through this lens of ableism. We can think about how, forced labor, slave labor was brought in and it was justified through this mindset of eugenics. And we can think about how, within white supremacy, within patriarchy, how ableism and this concept of this neoliberal productivity is what's driven us to use disability and to use ableism as a way in which we can justify these really horrific things that have happened. And so if we don't have disability as part of that table, then we're on the menu, right? And that's really why I think disability needs to be included in every facet when we think about oppression, because of its intricate links to everybody.
Anything to add, Sid? Thank you, Sean. I really admired the sort of socio-historical context in which you took to arrive at the end of that conversation. It was really nice. Sid?
I'm sorry, go back to the question. I was engrossed in Sean's
It's, what was the question I asked?
What was about unpacking the idea?
Unpacking the idea of disability and what does it mean, the sort of connotations that comes with when you say the word, the language of that, what it means, what it implies.
Well, perhaps we could talk about the difference between being disabled in terms of versus disability identified in terms of the reclamation. If people if there's the use of the term disabled as a way of sort of indicating that somebody is as an othering term, essentially, like that person is imperfect in some way, they're flawed, there's something wrong with them, they need to be cured, fixed, or whatever. But disability identified, that reclaiming of the word, being going to the social model of disability, which should I round that out? So the social model of disability is more about locating the root of that word within the way society defines itself and how it's constructed. So instead of saying a person is disabled because they can't, if you're using a wheelchair, you get to a door and you can't get in, the medical model of disability would say that person is flawed, they can't walk, so obviously they need to be, they can maybe be miraculously cured and then everything would be better. That's disabled with a small d. Whereas the social model of disability, well, maybe we should, that's actually societally, it's accepted that we build buildings with stairs, and if everybody was using wheelchairs, then there would be no chairs, and that person wouldn't face that. It's got nothing to do with them. It's got everything to do with the way the world is being built around them. And so disability, that disability justice, looking at taking the blame, I don't like that word, but the cause of the problem is within the construct that excludes people and not the problem with the person themselves. And so when somebody identifies as disabled in some way, they're claiming that and saying, I've identified that I'm somehow being excluded for whatever reason, and that can be for invisible reasons or visible reasons. And they're not always the same thing. Like somebody might be living a disabled life in general, facing certain barriers, but not identify as having disability. And then there's other sort of subsects, like for example, the deaf community. A lot of people in the deaf community don't consider themselves disabled. I mean, it's really, if you think about it, it's not. It's just they speak another language. I don't speak Swedish, but if I go to Sweden, I don't consider myself. I couldn't communicate with most people, but I wouldn't consider myself disabled there. And the same thing for if you're an ASL speaker. Why would you consider it's just a different language they use?
That's great, and you're arriving at some points around self-identification in the practice as well, and what it means to actually be responsive and effective to those particular things, that maybe asking questions. So I know there's many persons in organizations here who probably never even thought about the idea of asking or thinking about how they provide resources or support to a wider spectrum of persons who they interact with in their organizations, and what does it mean to create that sort of policy as well. Thank you. I'm going to open it up here. If you have any thoughts or questions or inquiries about that first question around you work for organizations or in your practice, what are you doing to promote a better awareness of disability arts practices in your work? And if you are, what curiosities you might have about the subject?
I just had a question about an acronym which was said at the very beginning. I think you said deaf/mad/disability. MAD, did I hear that correctly? And I'm not sure what MAD stands
So it's a MAD as a reclamation of crazy mental illness. And it's not everybody uses that. I personally prefer to call myself crazy, but I don't like the word mad. But that's not, I wouldn't impose that on anybody else. It goes along with the Mad Pride movement, which is an actual movement, people trying to say, look, it's...
I was thinking MADD, I was thinking...
No, just it's literally madness.
Anyone else?
I just have a question in terms of self-identification. I'm just going to use my own experience having worked with SMD, Society of Management with Disabilities, and there was sort of a really important learning curve that I had as technically an able-bodied dancer coming in to work with dancers that were wheelchair-based in the early stages of it, and ultimately it's grown into a functioning, very successful and very passionate group of dancers that probably have more passion for dance than
most of the
than able-bodied dancers in some ways. And what I find is in terms of the self-identification, there was never a sense where we walked into the room and said, well, you're a dancer, or you're a differently able dancer. It was also, we're just core dance people. And I guess my question is, there's a movement now within the context of especially arts practices where you walk into a room and you will start identifying yourself in terms of the pronouns you like to use. Is that something that is adopted right now within arts practices in communities that have mixed, we deal with mixed gender, we deal with mixed identification pronouns. Is that a piece of the action that can maybe be adopted, or is it already adopted in arts practices where they're saying, okay, so how do you, the key word is how do you self-identify? What is your word? What is your definition of self? Is that something that is a thing? Or is it just people use it when they need to get some sort of clarification when you're starting, maybe even in a rehearsal process, when you've got differently able people in the room? Is that a standard? Is that a format thing? Or is that something that should be adopted? Or
So the way I would think about the ways that folks identify is through that community-based kind of community building that I was talking about, and how people might identify within MAD with MAD as a community-based and political identification rather than something medical arts, right? For many of the artists who have been through Tangled, there's a difference, I think, between being relationally disabled and politically disabled. And so when I say relationally disabled, I mean based on the social, and that means they're creating art really based on the lived experiences of deafness. But I would argue that disability arts as a movement, I think it has to be informed by experiences of disability as a whole, but it doesn't necessarily have to address disability specifically, right? And so the way that pronouns are kind of used at the beginning of meetings in which we talk about the pronouns that we should use to address each other, I don't think disability would be used in that way, because it's not, the intention isn't to kind of subcategorize people into certain ways of being, but rather to think about how they would identify within their practice. So we wouldn't necessarily at each meeting say, hi, I'm a visual artist. Like, we might not choose to identify that in that way, or like, hi, I'm a queer artist. Like, I think pronouns really are a way of preventing violences, of being misgendered, and so those are necessities that are part of the kind of housekeeping that happens, is how do we address each other respectfully. But how you identify, I think, is fluid, and it can be something that changes, right? And so we wouldn't necessarily want a deaf artist to say, like, I'm in deaf arts, because that's something that a lot of people feel stigmatizes their practice. I think what's really unfortunate is that even though disability arts is becoming a burgeoning movement and political artistic movement, one thing that happens is that artists who do identify that way are afraid of being pigeonholed into that kind of, they're always going to be the disabled artist who gets brought in, and they want to, they don't want to be typecast, they want to be able to explore, and they want to be able to grow. So I think it's important that we recognize that a disabled artist needs to have opportunities to develop their practice, to experiment, to fail, the way that any other artist would, in order to grow from emerging to mid to established, right?
There's a certain amount of, like, to ask people will identify themselves when they feel safe to, and I mean, there's some groups that invite pronoun sharing at the very beginning. I think it's best when it's done softly, personally, because if it feels forced, people might not be. I mean, even gender is such a huge, widely varied spectrum. I mean, sometimes you can't encompass that in a couple words. So, like, to just let people share what they want, when they want, but to try to make it safe, make the space safe space. And that didn't make any sense. Yeah, okay. We got you. Okay.
I think there's something also about how persons and beings feel in a space, so that the way they're open to actually then start to identify the many layers in their. We've been having this conversation a lot since yesterday as well about in seeing someone who, let's say in this case, who's black, what's missing from the conversation, right? So, but it's also walking into a space and feel comfortable to say, I'm comfortable in this space where you will then, I will invite you into a community where I can then really tell you more about myself. Because there's trauma involved when working also in this arts or in community arts practices, or sometimes in other practices that are not totally understood in a large context of just walking in to do an artistic practice or to do work. So how do you nurture a sense of community from the very beginning, so you're actually able to promote more working with these arts practices and or working in an artistic practice. Anybody have any questions at this point in time or thoughts?
I was just going to say to that point, it's like as someone who tries to welcome all walks of life, and even that phrase, even as I said it, is ableist, into our artistic world and into our theaters. That's all well and good to say we want everyone and we are inclusive, we welcome everyone. But the true test is, do people actually feel welcome in your space? And so to flip that it's not about how open we are, but actually what is the person's experience when they're engaging with your organization or with your building. In that case, it's like, do they actually feel welcome? Because that will actually tell you whether then you can collaborate as an artist.
Yeah, I'd also like to say that, it's also really important that these kind of ideas are sort of developed from within the community and not from the outside in. Because I really hate to see identifications like that end up developing sort of a hierarchy within the arts in terms of the artistic merit of the work. Like, oh, this is disabled art, so it gets framed differently, and it's not treated on the same way as we would treat other artists or traditional artists. Coming from as an Indigenous artist, but also as a person who identifies as having a disability, what is Indigenous art? Is it that contemporary, mural on the wall? Even though it may be made by an Indigenous artist, how do we define Indigenous art, and who is involved in constructing those frames? And I think that's just as important here in this conversation when we're talking about disability access to the arts. I was going to say justice, but it's all the same thing, right?
And then when the two panels conflict, you're like...
Yeah.
I also want to acknowledge really quickly, well, not really quickly, but like Danielle, you brought up a really great point in that, something I learned from an elder Mona Stonefish was that disability doesn't even necessarily fit within an Indigenous lexicon. Like, what Mona said was that, in her community, like, disability has a place, and folks there, they're storytellers, they're knowledge keepers. So when we as Tangled, we're doing outreach to Indigenous communities, like, how we frame disability in this way is really vital to how we're making folks feel welcomed, right? Because of those complexities, it's not as, like, intersectionality, I don't think, is just this layering of, here, I'm this. It's like, it's all those things together, but that makes them more. And so I think that's a really great point, is that people don't necessarily want to be identified within one grouping. At the same time, some people do, and some people do want to think of holding space for disabled artists. So that complexity, I think, is something that all of us as organizers, as programmers, have to think about when we're, if we're, and I hope we do, we desire disability and its possibilities to disrupt our own practices. So thank you for being here.
Anyone else I'm sure there are big questions you have about disability and artistic practice, and I want to say that hopefully this is now, through the process of the beginning, your names, and this is a safe space where you can actually have queries about what work are different organizations doing in this sort of lexicon of looking at disability arts practices, if any. Is there anyone out there?
We're not really doing much at all, to be honest, but, well, just to be frank, but what we are trying to do is just to work on a project right now. Like, the context of the work that I do is very community-based, so when we're programming, we work a lot with community partners. So one of the partners we're working with this year are two wheelchair dancers who are going to be offering a series of workshops to other kind of youth, well, to youth who identify as being disabled, and they're going to be offering these performance workshops that will culminate in a performance. So, but I find, and maybe you can see, because I feel like I'm turning red right now, like I find that I am so worried, I think, about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, that like I'm really trying to kind of forge ahead with the work, but I keep worrying that I'm just going to do the wrong thing. And I am getting emotional, but I keep telling myself, like, it's more important to do the work than not do the work. So it's okay if I mess it up sometimes. But yeah, I guess I would love to just have some feedback about that, like what is everybody doing in this room and how do you overcome this, because you can't be super knowledgeable right at the get-go, but you want to do the work. So sorry for emoting so much. So yeah, that's kind of where I am. And
Sorry, Lana, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think the biggest work is to give yourself permission to, and this is really hard, but to give yourself permission to know that your heart is in the right place and to make mistakes, because you will make mistakes, but everybody will, because there's no right answer. That's the one thing that I've learned working at Tangled for the last year and a half is just how there isn't a right answer. You're gonna make, but that's not the point. The point is that you're trying, and anybody that you talk to wants to see that you give them. That's the important thing. So to not try, to let that, like, so your real work is to start just knowing that first. Once you're there, you don't have to feel like
sorry. No, thanks everybody for listening.
Honestly, as a person who works, I did a lot of musical theater, and I was often the only disabled person in musical theater. So I was screaming about my needs to people that were like, "What? Why are you even here? If that's what you what?" So any acknowledgement at all that you are trying, or that you want to help, or want to accommodate, we appreciate it, because we spend so much of our lives going, "Hi, I exist, me," that for you to be like, "I see you, I just don't know what you need." And we also understand, like I remember I got hired somewhere and they were like, "Oh, cool, a disabled person, so you're gonna help us with these new disabled laws. And you're gonna like," and I was like, "Do you realize that like there are like thousands of disabilities and I have one?" Like I don't know what somebody who's blind needs or somebody who's hearing impaired needs. Like I can tell you what I need and what my friends need, but I can also tell you that most of my friends all have cerebral palsy, and I don't know what, you know. I have a friend through Cahoots. Her name's Jessica. She's blind. I have no idea what her experience is. And I can't interview everyone and say, you know, let's get thousands of disabilities in a room and have a big interview session, and you all tell me what you need. I'll make sure that it's accessible to everyone. That's not possible. So deal with what, you know, if you hire a disabled person or you come across a disabled person or someone comes in your audition room, ask what they need. They'll tell you.
I was going to say, I think it comes down to communication. Whoever's in front of you, maybe if there's a strong relationship, you can just say, what do you know, just keep the communication open and talk to them. What are your needs? What's not being met? It's an open space. Then
And
just talk to them.
Yeah, and listen.
Yeah.
Just listen, because I mean we all get it. Like, you know, we're all in process, right? And I think honoring and acknowledging that incompleteness is just recognizing that you're human, right? And a lot of people we get that. So, you know, not having all the answers is just being human. It's just that simple. And it just sort of reminds me of just sort of like what you're saying, your story is like what's going on at U of T right now, because they're developing their mental health task force. And they have one representative for all undergraduate students, one representative for all the graduate students, and one representative for all the professional students. And they're supposed to be able to know and all the mental health needs of all across 3 campuses and 3 different locations. That's going to work.
That's not stressful at all.
Yeah. But just for me in terms of my practice, I usually incorporate like live performance based in my lived experience of having OCD and PTSD. So I actually make that part of the art, because for me the artistic practice is sort of reflective and connected to how we live. And so if we're not living our teachings, if we're not living what we believe in, then what are we really teaching? What are we really putting out there? And what kind of community are we trying to create? So for me, my kind of thing is that's how I incorporate, that's how I bring it up, is, you know, the art helps to hold the space, and then I do these things in where people can interact and talk to me about it. And so that's sort of how I help to broaden the disclosure, because it would be really great if we could all do it safely. But unfortunately, it's not a reality, and I've had my own personal experiences, right? Things happen, things go down. So it's really important that we're broadening that, and we can do that together.
It's gonna be okay. It really is.
I can talk a bit about some of the work I do. So I've been teaching an art class for the past 5 years at Paul and Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital, which for those of you who don't know is a hospital for kids and youth with disabilities. It's an outpatient program. So it's like basically signing up for your kid for a weekly art class like you would anywhere, but it's accessible and for kids and youth with disabilities. So it's at a hospital, but like no one's sick. And I definitely get a lot of reactions from people when I tell them what I do. I say I teach an art class. It's a hospital for kids with disabilities, and people are like, oh, that's sad. And I'm like, no, it's an art class. It's a lot of things other than sad. You know? But anyways, so that experience in terms of like being like in that group is like amazing, but in the wider context of being an employee in that hospital or being an employee in the art department, where there's a lot of ableism and like it's not based in disability culture or disability leadership. Like it's really not even on their radar that like, oh, we should have staff like who also have disabilities, you know? So I'm like neurodivergent, and like even that identity, like it's not something fixed. It's just because like I'm always like, oh wait, oh okay, so I have this. Okay, wait, I think I'm autistic, and you know, it's like something that's just like always unfolding and that I'm always growing into and like learning about. But yeah, like in terms of disclosure, it's just like complicated and frustrating sometimes because like speaking with the management or the administration, like if I try to speak about things like coming from that place of like, I am also a part of this community, you know, that I receive like a lot of contempt, like, and like when it comes to things like just like buying materials, we used to have a generous materials budget where you buy something, submit receipts, get reimbursed, and they somehow wound up over budget, and now like anytime we want to buy anything at all, we have to write a permission form, like fill out a permission form first, and like I'm not good with planning. Like part of my neurodivergence is that planning, organization, like administrative work are things that like I will just put off and like avoid and be stressed out by forever. And so when I try to like talk about that and they say, oh, it's just doing things a little differently, just a bit of simple planning, and I'm like, it's not simple to me, and that if a system isn't user friendly, then it's not disability friendly. And like to me, as someone who is like pretty emotionally dysregulated, like just existing like in a professional environment that is hostile to my needs, like that alone is like a huge access barrier and like a huge source of injury, like that gets repeated over and over. And then there's like being like in terms of like mentoring and like being, you know, in a leadership position as someone with a disability and as a neurodivergent person, like with all these neurodivergent kids, and like how to be a mentor in that capacity, but like still being in this environment that is not rooted in disability culture and where there's just like this assumption that like the participants have disabilities and the like facilitators don't, you know? And like how do I disrupt that? And especially when it's like, okay, well, like, you know, my disability or disabilities are invisible, so it's like, so how do I talk about that? Like, do I give my list of like very stigmatized diagnoses that like, if the, you know, they were to go and like Google like, you know, my personality disorder and just read that like I'm a manipulative person and you should like stay away from me. And so, and like also with the kids, like because it's a hospital and there's really, you know, just like specific, just like rules and boundaries around confidentiality, including their diagnosis. And so I can't be like, so like as autistic kids, like what do you think, you know? So I have to like find these like more subtle ways, I guess, and like be really open about being someone who has a lot of big emotions and how those like really big emotions can like affect just like my physical experience of the world. And then also I've recommended the project disruption, the project that I can't remember your name. Sorry? Andrea, the project that Andrea was talking about. So I recommended that to a couple of the teams, and like, and I was talking about, I was like, so you know how here, like everything is like made so it's really accessible to people with disabilities, but like not necessarily the leadership role. And like this is also like participant who's been coming. Am I talking to you? No, okay. I always feel self-conscious, but like, shut up. But of course, that's so this is a team who's been attending programs at Holland Bloomview for years and like wants to be a teacher, and like I'm always telling her like, okay, if you want to take over this program one day, like, you know, I'm gonna help you get there. And so I said to her, like, you know, it's really rare that like there's opportunities for youth with disabilities that are facilitated by people with disabilities, and just like encouraging her to take advantage of that, and then also like talking about books. So it'll be like, oh, I read this amazing book by a non-speaking autistic person who's the first non-speaking autistic person to write a novel. And so like I find ways of like trying to bring disability culture in and trying to like be like a neurodivergent mentor, but like in this context where there's just no, it's just like all of me, you know? And in a lot of ways that's a really great learning experience, but in a lot of ways it's frustrating.
Yes, totally.
And also like sets me up for a lot of discrimination. Like I'm pretty sure that they won't like give me any other programs to run because it's like, oh, we don't want to deal with Melissa and like all her blah blah blah, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I'm the only art staff to not also work in the summer program because it's like you have to work Monday to Friday from 8 to 5, and like I just can't sustain that kind of work schedule. And they refuse to make work accommodations to make that position accessible to me. Anyway, so all in all, lots of learning, lots of figuring it out as I go, lots of discrimination, and then also working on, like I said, my own project, Empath School for Arts and Magic, which is really trying to center the needs of trauma survivors and neurodivergent folks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
You've hit so many interesting and important pointers, right? Being up against bureaucracy, because we're in arts organizations, right? There's a certain point when we mean well, but we will meet up against that bureaucratic structure that will actually does not even understand what it means to actually be reflexive in terms of relating to disability arts in a particular way, or how the culture, understanding and finding knowledge through partnerships with those people already working in the field to support the development of the themes. And I'm thinking about it and I'm just like, oh yeah, everyone has been told to have this little one-pager about how they address 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they go about creating those particular things with actually consulting community, as Sean mentioned. So who are the persons out there working in disability arts? Who are the persons working in community arts? Who are the persons working in organizations that are focused on this work that can be allies, that can be collaborators, that can be supporters of every document, every way we'll think about engaging with persons or peoples with their many spectrums of disability. So thank you for that, because I think you're getting many of the challenges that are arriving in space and how to mitigate them, and also honoring and calling out some of the discrimination, whether illicit or perceived, that actually comes from the actions of those who are quote unquote able-bodied or thinking in able-bodied way, but working with or trying to support persons with a various spectrum of disabilities. So thank you.
Yeah, you hit a trigger word. To me, a couple things jumped out of your commentary. Was first of all, it feels like you're operating on an island. You're the sole proprietor of that island. But is there an existing alliance for this organization, like Disabilities and Arts Practices? Is there a so-called alliance that practitioners can actually turn to? I mean, other than this room right here, right now, here's the building of the alliance, right? Everybody's kind of in the same zone. But does it exist already on a national scale, or even a localized scale?
Like as a service organization? Yeah, well, there's DMAC. What was that acronym? Like Deaf and Disability Mad Arts Alliance.
Say that again, please.
The Deaf and Disability Mad Arts Alliance.
Okay.
DD, yeah, of Canada.
And does that actually, I mean, if an individual practitioner wants to reach out and say, I'm having this issue at my workplace, what counselors, what specialists can I turn to? I'm sort of like the DTRC, we have a
right, of course. I don't think it's as large of a, and anyone can speak to this if they know more. I just know Michelle DeContes, who is one of the person who you would reach out to there, and she's worked more like with our executive director at CDA as well as an advisor. But that's the organization that I know of that as like a national service organization that I think people would go to. I think it's like DDAAC, Deaf and Disability Matters Alliance of Canada, and it's Michelle DeContes.
I'm just wondering if that's common knowledge for, everybody in the room. I mean, it's brand new to me. Not that I know CDA, but
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
That's good.
No, I was wondering what services they offer, and if you ever become a member of the organization in order to access them, or whether any layperson can call in off the street and say, I'm encountering a problem, I don't know how to.
You can search them online. Michelle is very open to have conversations with, she's an open person, to have conversations with anyone on the spectrum of things that is involved in that. I want to take some time up to say that Andrea has arrived and she had some car troubles, but she's here! And you can jump in at any time. We're keeping it informal in terms of just as a conversation.
Okay.
So if you wanted to give your thoughts on either how you're working with this arts and as a practice, and we're at this section of like how you're promoting or working with disability arts and your artistic practice, and then also what some of the challenges that you see or is arising from your work.
Okay, all right. Well, okay, first of all, apologies for being late. I actually came from, my name's Andrea, and I'm a poet and spoken word artist and facilitator, and also a member at Workman Arts. And a lot of people are nodding, so familiar. If anybody isn't familiar with Workman Arts, I found out about it about 3 years ago, and started my association as a teacher. And how I would describe Workman Arts is it's a space for artists who have concurrently are dealing with mental health or addiction issues, funded through CAMH. And sometimes when I tell people about it, people are like, oh, it's like art therapy, and I'm like, no. And it's one of the things that I love about Workman Arts is that they make it really an important part of the description of what they do there, what we do there, that it's not art therapy, but it's a space for artists to continue their work, for us to continue our work in an environment that supports that we are human beings with a lot going on. So as I said, I started there as a facilitator, teacher about 3 years ago, looking for teaching gigs pretty much. And then as I was working there, I started to, I have a personal history of on and off depression and anxiety, especially social anxiety. Hello everyone. So I do, and then I became a spoken word artist because it's like, people are like, wow, really? And I'm like, yeah, it's like I made a career out of overcompensation. And a lot of us, I think, come to performing because we don't want to be bullied by that.
but by that anxiety. So I found I was in good company. But while I was working at Workman Arts, I'm like, oh, I'm here helping to, save the world. And in that kind of headspace, well, that's a bit anyways. And then I, started to have my own issues. I had life happen, and I was dealing with some pretty severe grief-related depression and anxiety, and I was like, have to participate in some of the programming, and I just love it. It's kind of like, as an organization, it's kind of my model of how I would like the future to be, just where we're able to bring fully who we are to a space and support each other, as well as explore different things. There's so many programs. They do, we do, but I don't, they do. Visual art, there's painting, there's filmmaking, so many things that I would like to explore myself. As well, we started to do some yoga, so there's like that idea that we are a fully functioning, human being that has a physicality as well as, a cognitive side, or even as, less physical, creative side. So so there's all these different programs. As a facilitator, I've taken some programs that have to do with, how to just have an understanding of where other people are coming from in terms of what challenges they might have, or just issues that are important to them in terms of how they would like to see a space be run. So it's helped me have an awareness around gender and gender identity, and things that help me make the space more inclusive and comfortable for people who I'm working with. So that's kind of how I came here. And when I was talking to Charles about this session, I was like, so Charles, what am I doing there again? Am I talking about being a facilitator at Workman Arts? Am I coming as a teacher? Am I coming as an artist? Is it an artist representing mental health issues? Is it a woman of color? What? And he's like, maybe intersectionality, Andrea. So it's like, okay. So do we have time for a little excerpt? Can I share a little bit of poetry with you? Do we have time?
We do. I was going to actually move, we'll come back to you from that point around keeping art at the center. What it means to keep an artistic practice at the center of everything that we do, rather than actually the form or the ability or the disability and I just want to introduce and create space now for Kirsten to share her artistic practice, which is part of the panel, and then we'll come back to that. To have those two things intertwined. I like enliven the conversation.
Okay, I don't know how it's all working. Thank you, Kim.
We're all here. We're going to dance soon. So again, Kirsten, if you wanted to tell people about what you're working on, what this is, it's her moment.
Sorry, I thought we were just doing a performance. I was waiting All right, so my name is Kirsten. I am a playwright and performer under Cahoots. I'm originally from Alberta. I moved here I divorced myself from theater, which is my greatest love. I kind of was like, I'm done. I can't get anywhere. I'm going to go make pop music. Yay! And then I spent 5 years making pop music. And it wasn't getting me anywhere either. Not where I wanted to be, and I wasn't really grounded with who I was, because so much of me is based in musical theater. I was raised in it. I love it. I tell stories and everything, but I'm also not a Joni Mitchell. I'm not a singer-songwriter type at all. I eventually had to go back there, but musical theater is such an ableist space that there was nowhere for me to go back to, especially in a place like this where it's so cutthroat and there's
the community is this big. It's like professional. Like I have friends back home who move out here to get an agent so that they can get professional work at home and get paid for their talent at home. And I went to one audition for Spam-A-Lot on my 26th birthday. It was the worst experience of my life. I had the audition, and I've been auditioning since I was 3 years old. It's like this. It doesn't faze me at all. It's one of my favorite things in the world. I went to one audition in Toronto. It broke me. It broke me. I didn't go in any rooms alone ever for like the next 4 years. I was like, nope. New people? Nope, can't do it. Nope, not an artist. And then I took a trip to New York City to see a band, which is what I do. If you know anything about me, there's this band that I'm obsessed with. Anyway, I had an anxiety attack, and I took a mental health trip from work, and I went to the New York City date to see this band, and I couldn't afford to take a plane, so I took a 13-hour bus to New York City. And on this bus, all these words came out on a piece of paper, and I started reading back these words, and I thought, oh, crap, this is a show tune. No, I thought we were done. Oh my God, what do I do? Okay, so we're doing this. So I get to New York, I went to the concert, and that was all I did in New York. Otherwise, I was locked in this little apartment in Brooklyn, working out this story of this girl and trying to make it my story, but also not my story. It was very meta and very strange. And that was in September of 2017, and we're here now in May of 2019, and it's finally starting to form into its own thing that almost floats by itself, thanks to Erin and Marjorie and the community that is Cahoots and the acceptance that is Cahoots. Thank God, because otherwise I'd just be like, what am I worth? Which I think is the plight of every disabled artist, is like, where do I sit? So this is the result of Gimpy is the result of just, what's that line where it's like, invention, something is, yes, necessity is the mother of invention, and that's where this came from, is I didn't have a space, so I had to create one. And hopefully, eventually, I'll be able to step out of my space and give it to other people, and then go back behind my curtain and hide. Because that's what I like to do. I like to just go see my band on tour and then run away.
All right, ready to go?
Yeah.
This is an excerpt from Gimpy, Gimpy by Kirsten Kirsch.
You said it right, I'm so
I know, I've been practicing it all day. Alright, so we see Soren dancing and occasionally stumbling in a dance class. She's very clearly hurting herself. At some point during this, Presley, our male lead, enters. He's dressed in a leather jacket and jeans with a cigarette tucked behind his ear. Soren is distracted by his entrance and falls into Presley a few bars after he joins in.
Whoa there.
He steadies her as she looks up. They dance side by side. Presley's trying to get him to partner with him, but she doesn't want to. They dance. The class ends and they're left to cool down.
Wow.
What?
I've never seen someone go to dance class that way, considering you're intense. It's a good thing.
Thanks, I guess.
Yeah, I could barely keep up.
I fell into you.
Clearly you couldn't help yourself. No judgment.
Why are you in here?
It looked interesting. I'm new to town and was downstairs signing up for guitar lessons.
Oh, welcome to Tulsa.
Back, actually. I was born here.
Welcome home then.
Thank you.
Sure.
Guess you could say I'm just here trying to get my bearings and make myself a place.
Homesteading ended a long time ago, even if this is the Midwest.
Even a reformed city dweller needs a couple reliable friends. We can't all just buy a horse and wear a cowboy hat to be magically transformed.
I don't think I've ever met anyone from here who wears a cowboy hat. And very few ride horses, partner.
Seems I have a lot to learn.
Soren is struggling to keep the fact that she's in pain under wraps.
It's probably none of my business, but are you okay?
Oh, sure.
Can I help?
No, I'm all right.
Wanna dance again sometime?
With you?
No, with my father.
Bye, Roger.
We're in a diner now. Soren sits at her table. She sips her milkshake and studies something in a binder. She's auditioning for Newsies, and she's trying to like mark a dance, but it's not really working. She has headphones in. Present.
Who knew we'd meet each other again so soon?
If it isn't Roger.
What are you up to in this fine establishment?
I need a quiet place to work.
What is it you're working on?
There's new management in a theater company in town. They're doing Newsies, and I'm going to crush. Not that that's any of your business.
I'm probably playing in the pit for that show.
Really? I thought you just arrived.
I did, but my mom is the new artistic director for that company. Pops, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Wow.
I was not expecting that.
No?
I guess that guitar should have tipped me off.
I have tricks in my pocket.
And things up your sleeve.
I thought you might be a Tennessee Williams girl.
I have got to learn to be less of an easy read.
You're definitely not something to skim over.
I'm amazed you can see me at all.
You're in Technicolor in this room. Mind if I sit?
I should really get back to work here, but I can't stop you from taking a seat.
She tries to leave.
I can play all the guitar parts if you want to help.
Why are you here with me when you could be there with them?
They bore me. You're far more interesting. Would you like to go out sometime? Go dancing?
No.
That was quick.
I mean, no thank you. I can't.
Because
I have work to do?
On Newsies.
Yes, exactly.
There's a ton of dancing in Newsies.
What do you want?
Dance.
I don't even know your name.
Funny. I don't know yours either. I was completely prepared to call you Maureen until the end of time.
I'm sorry.
Hit me where it hurts.
Are you always this forward? It's kind of.
Got you to dance with me.
I couldn't deal with the secondhand embarrassment from you dancing alone.
Come on, admit that it was fun.
Not for the life of me.
Thoroughly modern Millie.
What is this, musical association?
I can play a mean Conrad Birdie.
Or the Pharaoh, since you're in Technicolor.
Don't you ever quit?
Johnny Lang said quitters never win.
I know you'll want to quit me, baby.
I don't know whether to be happy that I already have you calling me baby or impressed that you can quote Johnny Lang.
Look, I don't mean any harm. Just go out with me.
Don't reduce me to recreating streetcar here.
You must get off on disappointment and regret. Fine. Right here, right now.
Can I order you another milkshake?
One milkshake and one more dance.
Yeah?
If you dare.
Challenge accepted. Wait here.
I love this song. How'd you know I love this song?
Fate.
He offers his hand, Soren takes his hand and gets up gingerly.
I got you.
He circles his arm around her waist and pulls her close. They dance for a while.
Really? How'd you know?
I asked the guy who makes your milkshakes what you play most.
Honestly, surprised it isn't a show tune.
You're not the only one with tricks up your sleeve.
The orders come, a milkshake for Soren and a full meal for Presley.
You tricked me.
Not at all. Just ordering dinner since this is a date.
Sly.
I can't blame a guy for wanting to spend more time with a pretty girl and eat some genuine southern food.
Let me be clear. I'm just trying to prove a point.
What point?
That I'm not a game you can play.
Noted.
What is it?
The southern.
And that is?
An omelet with a bunch of stuff on it.
Breakfast for dinner?
Live a little, remember? Can I show you how?
Good choice. Makes me wonder about the Presley who knows his playwrights and late 90s blues instead of the love child of Tony Manero and Sal Mineo trying really hard to star in Remake of Grease.
I want to play professionally someday.
Do you play gigs?
Yeah, I'm really trying to get better at coming up with original material, you know? Love the really old school blues, cool grooves with lots of room.
The Johnny Lang thing makes total sense.
Yeah, I haven't been here long and it's a bit of stretch to 21. I think there are all laws against busking here, although I don't know how enforced they are.
What a weird thing to outlaw.
We are in outlaw territory. There are underground tunnels so the police can catch bank robbers, but you outlaw things like street performance and opening milk cartons on the wrong side.
Actually, the tunnels were constructed to protect the wealthy from danger and not conceal criminals.
To top it off, she's an encyclopedia of Tulsa law.
Who's kid?
Oh, there it is.
You didn't know.
Politics aren't really my bag. Tell me about you, besides political leanings.
I'm torn between here and there, and I wish I could bring them closer together.
Where's there?
New York City. I love it here, though. I wish it would turn like here.
You have a funny love for silly. Plot twist.
They tell me cities don't have heartbeats, that dreams are fallacy. And my love and touch and squeeze down to be the one to hold me. But it's always in the future, when the body remains here. Pictures of a bigger town, in my mind so clear all I need. But this town is so good at holding me.
really. I spent most of my life there, at least until my dad left and my mom couldn't support us alone. I miss New York though, more than I expected.
What's it like?
Beautifully vicious, cutthroat, fast.
Sounds like paradise to me. They say if you can make it there.
What's keeping you here?
Well, I have cerebral palsy.
Does it make things hard?
A few. Getting seen at auditions is tough sometimes. I mean, truly seen, without my father hanging over my head. I wish I could tap dance without having to tape ice packs to my knees for 12 hours the next day, or that my digestive system and I were on better terms.
Is that the real reason you keep refusing to acknowledge that there's something between us?
No. You really are annoying when you want to be.
It's not so bad, is it? Now that we're here?
No. In fact, I wish it were worse.
Why?
Because nobody has ever wanted anything to do with me for me before. They want the mayor or the disability.
And it's absolutely impossible for anyone to be any different.
No, but it doesn't make any sense that someone like you is.
Someone like me.
The James Dean-looking, guitar-playing type with trails of women in his wake wherever he goes, who secretly has a heart of gold. You're a TV treatment, and I'm not even convinced I'm awake now.
Let me help you with the newsy stuff.
Why?
Because I want to.
End of excerpt. Thank you so much. There's something that's been coming up from the very beginning, which is under self-identification and also now intersectionality. I want to throw into the room positionality as well.
Okay. So that's with the deaf community, and so this speaks to some of what you're experiencing, is that we, novelist and poet, at that time, we went, just to speak to your point, we went to the Canada Council in order to commission this individual, and we were told that they weren't a professional writer and that we couldn't actually try, get any funding for him as a award-winning poet to write a play for us. And so that was a conversation we continued to have at the council. And so that began kind of our journey with this particular playwright, which we took into production as a play that's primarily in American Sign Language. At the time I started that play, I had very minimal American Sign Language, and I've gotten to some, conversational level ASL. And so, and that went into production with Cahoots and Peter Passerai, as it turns out. I will say, so one thing that we recognized as an organization when we started that journey, so to speak to your experience, is that we're like, okay, this is a hearing company. We're like, what's our experience with deaf individuals? And we're like, okay, everybody just calm down, everyone calm down. And one thing that we kind of landed upon that we used over the time that it took to develop the play, produce the play, and I'll talk about an adjunct project that we did with it, was that we called it a vertical learning curve, basically, and we called it vertical learning, and we kind of imagined it as this cliff, and in some ways, it's a lot of what we were saying kind of was challenged because we were placing it as a challenge. But us was just like, no, it was like a Sunday afternoon and we were going to climb the cliff. And the reason we placed it that way was because we knew that there were all new things that we were learning and as we went on this journey. But at the same time, we made lots of mistakes. We were like, oh, oof, that big mistake, yeah, okay. And we took that on and we listened to the community. But every time we did that, we're like, did we fall off the cliff? And we're like, we didn't fall off the cliff. We're like, we're still on the cliff, right? Okay, here we go. Right? So that we would continue our climb. So we produced that particular show that was, and for us, because we understood, at least we acknowledge what the amount of learning that we needed. We said, well, why are we just doing this for one play that's going to run 3.5 weeks to 120 odd people a night? It was not sold out every night, but anyway, yeah, just 120 people a night. Why are we doing this? Like, we believe in the play. It was such a great play, and we enjoyed it. But what more could we do? So we applied for funding to have 2 consultants, and small as well as Catherine McKinnon, who is staff, to work to both kind of codify as well as research around our process, which was a pretty standard theatrical process in terms of a text-based play, a one-act, starring 2 people, but then had other different needs and different ways that we brought that particular production to life. So we did that. So we did a whole project, and then not only did they research that and codify that, then they kind of wrote out best practices, at least based on that particular text-based experience, and we put it up all online. And it's available online at our website at cahoots.ca. It's completely free to access. There's budget templates, there's processes templates of, here's an order you might think of in terms of as you're approaching things. Tons of links. It was done in 2015, I will say. And so even then, from us, we moved on from that in terms of even our processes, in terms of some of the things that we've done. I was like, working with a deaf individual that does spoken word. Well, we work with them differently than the way that we worked with the playwright, right? So we've moved on from that. So actually, Cahoots does have a grant to do more research and to kind of really understand, okay, that was the landscape in 2015. What does it mean in 2019 for the deaf community? And that was an opportunity. It's an organization that at that time had 1 full-time staff and 1 3/4 staff, and I was 3/4. And yet, this just speaks to the fact that if there's will and there's inside an organization, that we were able to get enough funding to be able to be supported by consultants in order to be able to track that process in terms of that project. And to me, it's about will, and more than anything, that a company that size, quite small, was able to achieve that. I think that's what you want me to talk about.
I'm putting on the spot, so
yeah.
It just occurred to me, just like, wait a minute. Because I think we're also here from different, DTRC is part of the team here as part of their learning and development. So I wanted to make sure that I have one of the things we realized with Sapam was that there's knowledge in the room and there's knowledge in the circle that sometimes we forget. And when we're in a space like this, that it's best to just reach out to persons who've done the work, who have done things, and learn from them as well, which is something we don't do a lot of in the arts enough.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, a huge learning from us. There's so much in specific learning, and that's available on the website. Again, and I didn't bring cards, I don't know why, but it is on that website, and so there's tons of specifics in terms of a starting place. It's been accessed by theater companies across the country as well as in the States. So large organizations as well, like NAC, Stratford, Opera Atelier, they've all used the kind of the templates and the budget templates and things like that.
And so what's it under? Like what would it?
It'd be under DAT, which is it's called the Deaf Artists and Theaters Toolkit. Sorry, I forgot that. Yeah. So if you look on our website, you'll find it. Okay. Yeah, under our programs. A huge thing we learned is it's so simple. It's just like listen to the community that you're interested in. Like I think it's so fundamental in that respect. I would say just hearing that people are doing more projects and hopefully then are going to take that step to listen to the community. I will say this, that deaf individuals, disabled individuals, POC, they're historically underrepresented in all art sectors. They're historically underemployed in all these sectors. So if you were seeking out information or you're seeking out feedback from these communities, you are asking for a consultation. So one, that should be compensated for. And so whatever your capacity to compensate them for that advice and for that time. And further to that point, because they are historically underrepresented and historically underemployed, really consider if you can compensate them at an even higher level than whatever your standard might be, because you're adjusting for work that is not a living wage, right? So I just offer that to consider that, and that's a practice that I'm trying to You know, that's a hard one because you say, okay, but this is my budget. I know, and that's a hard thing. But philosophically, if you believe in the work and you believe in what you're trying to do, then how's that answer?
And
I'll get
also-
off my soap.
And there's also and there's also diverse ways of thinking about that one thing. That the things, there are many ways to think about it. So I encourage also not to think about it in one particular way. I'll get back to Andrea in a second, because her introduction back to Workman Arts is through her practice and through, so she didn't go, I'm going to, in an organization, and then she came as an artist and then went to the organization. And it's providing inputs and support that way. So there are many ways to get to that particular place in this arts. Kirsten, you have something to say?
Yeah, it's a really amazing project. And I knew about the DAT document. But as an organization that is relatively new to the process of trying to be inclusive, I wonder about, taking off the stereotypical hat of an impression of what, disability is, and, thinking about the traditional visible disabilities, and then listening to the lady whose name I forget. The late was the word. Sorry, you were talking about. Melissa. Those invisible disabilities, and wanting to conduct programming and conduct core service delivery that respects that spectrum of opportunity, I think. How do we, as an organization, tackle making sure that we try to be as inclusive in reaching out to those spectrums and making spaces as inclusive as possible, knowing that we can't do it all, but I think about the programming that DTRC offers through OTM. I think about the core services we deliver through one-on-one counseling. I mean, those sorts of things can be done in a more inclusive way. I mean, you were able to successfully reach out, Marjorie, to the deaf community. What is the process to have a more robust conversation and be respectful when doing so?
Where is it that you work?
Dancer Transition Resource Center. So we provide counseling support, professional development for dancers at various stages of their careers. Yeah.
What's the OTM?
On the move for emerging dancers.
Do you want to, before we go to Andrea, do you want to shed some thoughts on that, Sean, or Christine? It seems like you work a lot with this spectrum, but also in sort of frameworks around opportunity for organizations.
Well, I think one thing that's really important is consistency and recognizing that, as Marjorie said, this is a community that has been historically excluded from participating in the arts. And so I think it's quite reasonable that folks are going to be wary of what sort of services are being offered and to what degree they really are created with them in mind, right? So I think if you're transparent about what you offer, if you do the outreach, and again, if you consult from within community, then that can be really a strategic way in which you begin to create pathways to consistent programming that builds your community base. So I think something, for example, that Tangled always does is we always have ASL at any of our public engagements, but we've since grown to have captioning available at all of our events. We have care attendants at all of our events. We have straws at all of our events. Like, there are so many facets to how you can be accessible. Like, I mentioned straws because straws are relatively cheap. They're relatively easy to include in your operations, and there are big things like ASL which will cost a lot and will your budget will definitely feel that. You'll definitely be thinking about how strategically you think about accessing your budget that way. But you can also think about things like straws for folks that move differently, for folks that shake. Straws can be such an incredible resource so that they can participate in the social aspects of an opening or a public event. And so there are little things that when you're consulting from within community, you might find out, like, oh, if I just properly label certain things in my event, or if I say, you know, we do allow service animals, like people that might not want to take that first step in approaching the organization, or might not want to feel like, oh, I'm going to be rejected if I ask about this this accommodation that I might need. If you can actually do that step for them, if you can make it as transparent and open as possible, what you'll be willing to do, what you can do, then I think you will, through consistency, build an audience base. And people want to participate in the arts. Like, they want arts and culture because it really is like access to a really vital part of how we build community. And so I think consistency is the thing that I've really been trying to hammer down.
I want to add, just in terms of building the organization, in terms of the structure, it's just, if you're talking about this, the organization, the space that people go to work, in terms of and making that space feel safe for people who might not, who might have invisible disabilities, who might not want to come out and say, I need this or whatever. I mean, it's really, most places you go, you can't go and say, I have this or whatever. But you know, sometimes there's difficulties with working and being hired if people know there's something wrong with you in the inside. I mean, being at Tangled is the first place I've ever been where I've come out and said, hey, I got a mental illness. I've succeeded in my career up to this point, always hiding that. And even in places where I probably could have, I've just never, because that was not safe. And I've been a people manager before, and as somebody who has been in and out, you know, I've had experience, lived experience, I know that when I hire people, I can usually identify people, or often identify people that I go, you know what, I betcha, but I never ask, and I never would, even now, it would just, so in terms of if you don't have that lived experience, you might not have that intuition. But the basic thing that you can always rely on is what other people have said, I think, is kindness and love. And if you have that, and just listen, focus on what are you doing in this space together. If you are working on an issue, is that person contributing to the job, and ask them, well, what do you need to do to work on this job with us together? And then they'll tell you. I think it was one of our volunteers had a great, terrible experience talking about, they had some sort of medical condition, they need to take a lot of breaks to use the bathroom for their personal, and in one of their other jobs, they were given grief about that. And it's just like, but she wanted to do the work, she just physically needed to use the washroom, right? But was given, but for her to have had to have said, well, it's because this and this and this, incredibly embarrassing and humiliating. Why would anybody do that, right? So she didn't, she left. So it's just that thing about saying, yeah, you're here, you're valued. If you're doing the work, great. And then just it comes down to listening and kindness. I think that transcends all those words. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add, there's a lot of toolkits available that, Tangled's worked on an exhibition toolkit with Humber University. There's one that Arts Build Ontario created around programming. There's the one through Ingeniums that talks about museum kind of standards of access. Cahoots, like we fall back to your theater guide for deaf artists and audiences all the time. Like there's lots of folks doing this work, but I think I can't underscore how important it is to try to reach out to community members who are from the community, from deaf, mad, disability communities. And, I say that as someone who has already some of these cultivated relationships. But if you don't have them, then reach out to organizations that you do know have them, or that you might have some folks who are interested in this, and you can use them as a starting point. We're not saying just, read the toolkit and you'll know everything. You definitely won't.
I'll take Heather, and then I'll go to you, and then I'll go back to Andrea, and she'll read for us and then share some thoughts some more. Okay.
So just to expand on Christian, because I'm also from the Dancer Transition Resource Center, and I mean our programs, we've worked with, since our inception, with people that would relate to a lot of these, from dancers being injured, from severe debilitating mental illnesses that would affect their ability to perform. So I mean our programs, like we have addressed these issues, every year, and learning abilities and courses and programs and counseling to help support that. But I think one of the main issues is that for our membership services,
what I have going on, so I think having, the awareness that we don't have the awareness, creating a space to hear from the people that we haven't even thought to ask, because it just is not on our radar. And those are the people who are going to be the most silenced, because there isn't anybody who's like them, who's spoken into the space and asked for what they need. So for me, it keeps coming back to, and probably because of the lens that I see things through, there has to be that ability to speak into that space. There has to be that coming into courage to speak in places where you might not be heard, and it might be like, what? What are you talking about? Nobody's talking about that. And those are the people that we need to hear from, who aren't being spoken of at all. So I wanted to, I was thinking, should I share this, should I not? But I think I will. I have a poem. It was inspired by this book called Intersectionality, that's coming out of feminist theory. They wrote this book and said, will you write a poem about it? And so I did. And the first part of it is really kind of my personal journey. So I'm going to jump ahead to the second part, and you're talking about like looking forward. And I feel like this is what I ended up doing. You start writing and you're one place, and then you go, oh, look, I'm over here now. So it kind of turned into a bit of almost like a manifesto of what I would like to see. And there were two quotes that came to mind when I was reading the book and just thinking about the idea of intersectionality and just bringing the wholeness of who we are to whatever community we end up in. So one was a quote by Rumi, and it was, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field, I'll meet you there. And the other one is a quote by a poet named Palma da Mayo, and it's, although complex, life is simple, it's individual. Living is the challenge, it's interactive, collective. So I think I'll just start here. This poem is still quite a little bit long, maybe four or 5 minutes. Is that okay? We have time for that? All right. Intersectionality is a key, a tool, to unshackle us from this constricting isolation, this limited, liminal existence of living on the periphery in silence. It is a meeting place for the fullness of humanity to thrive, beyond petty arguments of power, play, identity, polemics, beyond the oppressive paradigm of partisan politics, beyond criticisms of fragmentary essentialism, beyond the crushing constriction of classification. From an ocean of discontent, a new generation of feminists broke open the mold of what it means to be a woman, full and complete in our intricate complexity. What I've heard from the younger practitioners is we want to be free from the shackles of definitive thinking. We want a future less about waves and more about the stream. We want a fluid understanding of what it now means to be free as an ever-evolving human being. We have come to the place where sanctioned language has failed us, until there is no need for explanation, no need to defend our existence. Until then, our work is not done. Black, white, trans, cis, he, she, poor, rich. Even these are becoming straitjackets of restrictive thinking in an age where duality has given way to a kaleidoscope of multiplicity. The antidote to silence, intersectionality demands a self-defining declaration of, this is me, this is who I am. All of us are instruments of individuality in a symphony of idiosyncratic identity, handmade, heart-crafted, and rich with magnificent diversity. I am is the atom from which all social matter is formed, is the energy of intention hardened into collective action. I am becomes we are, becomes the rock that covers the paper of bureaucratic red tape exclusion, the rock that crushes the scissors of cultural division. Intersectionality is about inclusion. It's a socio-political spiritual census counting everyone in. Intersectionality asks the question, what is your lived experience? The human race has reached a space where silence no longer suffices. Intersectionality is the praxis of holding space for each other in upliftment and respect, in compassion and kindness. As we walk towards our version of social utopia, leaving behind interlocking systems of oppression, we are all Dorothy on the yellow brick road, and the intersection is where we meet our own version of the Tin Man, Lion, and Scarecrow. It is in the adventure of connection that we discover our intellect, our courage, and our hearts. There is no place like the home of our own authentic self and union of others who see and value the truth of who we are. So let's all meet at the intersection, out beyond the liberal guilt of tokenism and the smothering mob mentality of othering. Let's combine to create a group of impassioned individuals with a shared identity that defines us all as an empowered assemblage of outsiders to the fictional myth of mainstream normal. In this wild, abundant garden, a rose is as precious as a dandelion. Each has its own requirements for thriving inside our shared ecosystem. I'm human. I am a woman. I'm a woman living in a specific time and place who identifies simultaneously as both black and mixed race, and who is proud to survive long enough to have lived beyond middle age. My experience of feminism isn't the same as that of a Belgian woman or a transgender teenage Jamaican. Being a feminist means something different to a young Chicano man of 17 and a Chippewa elder of 73, and though both may share my political views, I know nothing of the struggle that they have lived through. Intersectionality gives us the wisdom and humility to want to learn each other's histories and histories. Intersectionality isn't neat and tidy. It's both an intention and a process, a destination and a journey. There are no clear, conclusive answers here, only a series of questions, asking us who we are, telling us we matter. So that's that.
So we have a little bit more time together, and I'm just mindful of maybe taking a bio break or just a stretching time. So we just, and also living in that moment. So we're gonna, I think I would love to pick up on that idea of not just intersectionality, but what are a series of experiences that can lead or shape us working in our arts organizations and in our practices differently moving forward, and what are the invitations or potentials for collaborating, and what ways we collaborate to end our time together. So, and I'll start with making a very, very political note about ecology, what I've noticed. So we have 5-ish, 8 minutes, 10 minutes to be the one that takes that destiny of going from this floor to that floor. If not, it's not accessible, right? So how these sort of scenarios that are around accessibility are interlacing with what it actually means to be actually ableist in thought and thinking, in language is another thing, or separating disability over here and practice over there. So it's really interesting, these ideas and these concepts and how we can move that forward as breaking down the barriers to how we also think about what we're doing and how we're providing service to people and others. Mimi, and then, what's your name again? Andrea.
Oh, I am, that's true, but I don't.
I'm Carthy.
Carthy. Okay.
Well, I was just gonna say, we're sharing some experiences, and part of one job I have is I work as a dance presenter. So we are going to present Propeller Dance in March 2020. So I guess part of our work was to say that we generally present main stage events at Harborfront Center. So I have seen them perform at the Harborfront Center Theater during Pan Am. I thought that possibly the Fleck Dance Theater, though, might be a better venue for a few reasons. Anyway, to try to cut to the chase, so we arranged to have a visit together. So they know a bit about the Harborfront Center Theater. One I knew was it's accessible for audience members, but the dressing rooms are downstairs. So when they performed there previously, the venue arranged a dressing room at stage left, just sort of kind of a hallway. So there's no running water and there's no washroom. But we knew that the downstairs dressing rooms were not possible. Okay, so we basically, two of the members from the company came in, we went in there, we played around for a while, fine. Actually, at the same time, there was a tap dancer who was also checking out the stages for a different company. So then we went over to the Fleck and we said, well, let's see, that's a proscenium venue. Let's see how that would work. I know that there are dressing rooms on the stage floor, like the same etage, right? And there's an elevator up. Also, though, there's steps to get on the stage, and there's a ramp.
The ramp's too steep.
So, okay, well, we played around with that a bit. They really did like the Fleck better, and they felt also that it gives more width. And with assistance, so we'll figure this out, people in wheeled vehicles are going to need a push up that ramp because it's not compliant. And anyway, that's a whole other topic about AODA coming in 2025 and knowing we need to move into compliance in the venues too. Anyway, then we say, okay, well, let's check out the dressing room, and it does have an accessible washroom, but in fact, the dimensions are not right for transfer. So we learned that. So now we know we have some workability, but people are, the performers who need more width for transferring to use the toilet are going to have to go down the hall into the public washroom, which they would have done in the other venue as well. But we were kind of, it's sort of weighing it out, what are the possibilities. So I'm just saying that's my current sort of experience, that even things you think are appropriately designed may not be until you really get in there and try it out. So.
And something else to consider is who are the envisioned attendees?
So
Because that's a whole rung stairs to see the performance.
Well, but that was another thing. Is there are some places at the front we can take out a row, but then often people have an attendant, so that we want to have as many seats as possible. Now there's another elevator to the upper level, and there are some seats in the boxes, but then people will indeed have to go through another elevator, so we will, in order to accommodate larger numbers, we'll have to make those arrangements. So I'm just saying those were some of the provisions we made. Even my question was, can Liz fly in on Porter Air? So that was an arrangement, a situation to arrange for her to deplane, at the island airport, and is that how, and that was fine, that was accommodated, and Renata was able to wheel and walk with Liz because it was good weather, but then it was the question of, is there going to be a taxi to get her from the airport? Anyway, so this is our adventure we're embarking on, but the idea of it quickly to bring the company in and walk through was really, for both sides, and to basically look at that cost as well and how that all works through.
It's an interesting conversation to have about with the artists, right? As presenters, it was mentioned that presenting more for disability artists, artists, but also have the conversation about what their needs are, rather than assuming what those needs are, having them do walkthroughs and be in the space, and then how are you responsive to those things, given a budget, given a space, given a there's all those things. It's really an interesting and complicated conversation.
Go ahead.
Carthy, and then Heather, and then Marjorie.
I thought you were ahead. Okay. So I currently am not with an organization, but I've worked both on the admin side and as an artist. And I was kind of talking to Marjorie about this on the break. But in my experience, especially arts admin, it's mainly been at festivals, but there's been a huge focus lately on like accessibility and inclusion, and all those things are great. But I kind of feel like a lot of that is like external facing, or it's about the artists, which is great, but it's not necessarily about reshaping office culture or what it means inside the organization. Like, it's not enough for there to be one person who's like championing it. It's like having to shape the entire value system of like, we want to accommodate like our artists' schedules and their like parenting needs, but like we don't want to do it inside the office. Like that just seems like a weird disconnect of belief. So, I mean, for me, I feel like my ultimate kind of desire is to see more organizations onboarding the idea of like, yes, we want our audiences and we want our artists to feel safe, but we also want the people administrating all that to feel safe too, and for that to be like a system that's consistent across the board.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. That's a really important point. Just a little thing. Just that again, DTRC, part of what we do is give retraining grants to eligible members. And so I have seen a growing trend, of course, just like all of us here, of people interested in applying for a course, whether it's like an extended version of what we're doing today, or, they've been taking ASL type language learning, but also like in terms of the training, I think there's been a few people, even like what kind of specialized training they can do as dance teachers to be able to expand those opportunities. So if that's helpful, like I do hear that, and of course for those ones that are meeting our eligibility criteria, that's similar to what I spoke on before, but still you have people that are interested, wanting to get those skills, and hopefully opening up other studio spaces, and acknowledging that they need to be educated and want to be educated and to be more inclusive in all sorts of different areas. So just saying from our perspective, we've been supporting some of that and can continue to do so. So hopefully, more and more opportunities.
Thank you.
I just want to tell two little short venue stories, anecdotes. Just to address the kind of like a purpose-built building, like this building, but that people thought about that in the building. In the backstage, there's currently no legislation to make that accessible, actually. And proof in point, we're continue to support a show called Boys in Chairs, which is a collective of individuals. The three main creators are disabled. It's about their queer sex lives and love lives. It's very raunchy and fun. And we were seeking out a space for it. And so we went to probably the most recent theater to open in this country, and it was still kind of just being opened. Not a lot of people had seen it yet. We went and we're like, oh yeah, that's gonna be good, it's gonna be good. Okay, we're gonna go to the dressing rooms. And we're like, okay, oh, right, they're downstairs. Okay, they're downstairs. That's the washroom, right, so that's probably not. We're like, wait, how would you get down here if you were in a wheelchair? And this is a theater that was like about to open, and this is, you can guess, and it's the most recent theater to open in Toronto. And everyone that was touring, hoping that we would come book their theater, their faces went ashen because it was a big component that just did not enter until they were about to open. And later I said, okay, that's fine. I think we're done. Thanks. Thanks. Okay. And it was also problematic to us when we had seen the space. I forgot to mention that the booth was like way up, and you kind of have to go up this little ladder. And we're like, oh, okay, that might be a problem. Who do you hire backstage? Who's in your offices, right? So we're like, okay, that's a problem. But then later they kind of emailed us, like, okay, this is our thing. I'm like, okay. And they were like, no, you can do this. You can go down the ramp that the parking lot and go to the elevator that's in the ramp in the parking lot. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to call you because I'm not going to, if I just type this out now, it's not going to think. So that started a good conversation, I think. But that's an anecdote of a purpose-built building, most recent theater to open in Toronto, that did not have those conversations early enough. So it's entirely, so to jump ahead with that show, so we're looking at where you might feel that it's obvious that a queer, sexy show might land in a cave, right? They have an elevator. The elevator goes down to the lower level. That elevator, while not directly into the dressing rooms, does have accessible dressing rooms. The washrooms are also on that level. They are non-gendered but separate at the moment, and will, by the end of this year, also be completely all gendered. So that's all great. Then we were like, the show in itself, as it has evolved, will have no chairs, and our hope is to welcome many people in wheelchairs to that show. But there's that one elevator. So it's great, there's non-gendered washroom with many washrooms, but if you have a show with an intermission and one elevator that can fit one person in it, what does that mean? And so we just had to go, that's a building that had to be retrofitted and has been over the years as their awareness has grown, but even then, we're almost in an ideal situation. And there's still things we need to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any thoughts from Lucia and Sean on that?
Well, I will do a quick plug. I sit on the board for this organization called Creative Users, which they're currently doing a national platform called Accessing the Arts, where they're hoping to work to post, do postings almost like instant coffee style, or where accessible posts can be created. And so they've been working with Access Visual Arts, AVA, Accessing Visual Arts, which Kim Fullerton from Akimbo has started, which is kind of this platform in which you can find, or you can start to find accessible venues. But I completely agree. Even the recently opened TMAC space, which does have an elevator in it, that elevator wasn't really created for the mass kind of consumption that we would expect elevators to, like elevators are very kind of tricky, is what we've learned. But yeah, venues oftentimes that call themselves quote unquote fully accessible or barrier free, haven't had to think about this. Like the AODA really is a bare minimum. So I think it's important that we keep consulting and we really do think about different ways in which we can either approach our spaces or how we can make accommodations to those spaces. Like I was sort of joking about making everyone use the kitchen, but it is kind of a real...
No, and there's 1, 2, and 3. And there's something, empathy mapping, which is not sympathy, right? It's so sympathy would say, oh yeah, I understand, oh my goodness. But empathy mapping is actually going through that kitchen as well. Everyone, and then having you go, oh, it's grimy in here. Oh my God, my feet are sticking to the floor. Imagine someone else.
It's education.
Yeah.
Education.
Yeah. You know, and so it's important to unearth all these things in terms of how we're thinking about if the future is going to be any different, what is our role in it as well? Because it then means that we leave here and we can envision something different because we have another set of skills of information and access and people and resources and organizations that we can utilize in making it a difference. You know, yeah. One, two,
Very
three.
quickly,
Yes.
I was wondering, is there any direct dialogue between the founders and people who give money to build and to renovate these places and your organization? In dance, through the Workers' Compensation Board 15 years ago, we established that dialogue. So founders, the Ministry of Culture now, well, I hope it's still the case, cannot fund any new space if the floor is not accommodating to dance. And that was just for dance. And other specific issues related to health and safety for technicians or for performing artists. So I was wondering if there's any dialogue, because in the end, you have to apply to receive money. It's considerable in investments. So the founders have the ability, the authority, the veto. Yeah, to say, I'm going to give you money, but you need to fit all these standards.
So I think it's the same thing on Ontario, but for example, the Ontario Art Council does have a Deaf and Disability Advisory Committee. Each council has their own committees which do kind of advise around accessibility. But in terms of whether or not a council can, like, you know, pull funding because of that, I think, like, I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think they can do that. But they can prioritize accessible spaces, you know, for example, theaters that are including relaxed performances in their run of a show, like that can be a priority. And it is a priority for the councils right now. So, and that's thanks to the work of folks like Michelle de Convene and Jeff McMurtry, which have canvassed the arts councils to, you know, make space for disability arts. So, but that's a good question. I don't know if they can directly influence the venue that are being proposed. So I will ask at the next meeting.
I have a few thoughts about that. I think I got in trouble when I said it first. They said if that's council money and it's public money, then they should be doing just that.
Yeah.
Because the money that is being invested into these organizations and to myself as an artist is actually public money. So that in that case, it's a human rights issue. And I'd be very open and honest about that, right? I think we have to be also a little reflexive that if we're going to be in the arts and using the arts as a powerful thing to change, that we have to understand our role in also changing and being at the forefront of the change as well. Just my thought on that. I will take
Funder wants something.
We'll go Funder, and then we'll go Melissa, and then Andrea, and then Danielle.
Just a quick point. Canada Council of the Arts, and I'm not sure about OAC, but it might be similar. We don't fund infrastructure, so we wouldn't have that kind of control. That would be heritage, and maybe there's a provincial body as well. But I definitely think that that's an interesting thing to pursue. And I mean, I can speak to our equity policies, but I didn't want to interrupt the line.
We'll come back to you.
Sure.
Can I just nuance that though?
Yes.
I'm hearing two different things here. I'm hearing Patty's ask about whether funders of infrastructure can be involved in a conversation and be mandated. But then I'm, also hearing whether other funders would be charged with only funding projects and activities that are happening in fully accessible spaces because that's public money.
Okay.
But I don't know if I'm the only one hearing those two different things, but are they, they're different things? Yeah,
Thanks.
Yes.
I wanted to touch again on the idea of emotional safety And like what you were talking about with like, if you ask a wheelchair user to go to the kitchen, it's like, maybe that does allow physical access, but not in like a really dignified kind of way. I guess there's like certain practices that are becoming more standard, but that I see just like being done like really badly. It's like you tried, but you didn't consult someone who actually knows, you know? So just like a couple examples of those. So like if I'm at an art event, often like if there's some kind of a statement about in this space we will not tolerate any form of discrimination, including, and then you know like list off all the different forms of discrimination, and sort of like they leave it at that. And to me, I feel like in most art spaces in Toronto, there's unlikely to be somebody who is voicing overt bigotry and discrimination, and so that kind of a statement, I feel like those kinds of statements should also address like, okay, and what can discrimination and bigotry look like when it's not overt, when it's not someone just being overtly and openly racist or sexist or whatever. But so like to give examples, like so here's what discrimination and bigotry can look like. Here's how it can camouflage itself. You know, this is what microaggressions are. Sort of like creating, just like fleshing it out, and then what does will not be tolerated mean? Like, or is that just a figure of speech? Is it someone's going to be approached, you know, respectfully? Does it mean you're going to get kicked out right away? Like, so yeah, to not rely on those kinds of figures of speech. And then another one is trigger. Is there not enough time?
I just realized that we're at the heart of the conversation now, and it's like 4:30. I didn't mean to cut you. I just realized I was like, oh no. We've gone to wrap up. Do you have anything you want to say real quick?
Yeah, just want to add to the conversation. I'm thinking about specifically advocating for my students, and one of the barriers that they have. One of the barriers that they have is not being online, which seems like it might not be a big deal, but it's a huge deal. They miss out on a lot of stuff because just the idea of going online is just, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So I just wanted to suggest the idea that when we think about accessibility, to also think about outreach. You know, so it's like, how would my students know about stuff? Well, you'd have to come to Workman Arts, or you'd have to go to a place where they go, to a community center that deals, you know, that serves people with mental health issues, and make sure you touch base and let them know what's going on, because a lot of my students know about stuff from word of mouth and going to places and showing up.
Yeah, I'd also say capacity building is probably one of the biggest strategies here, because we're talking about intersectionality of disciplines, getting lawyers, being involved with architects, getting in touch with people to actually get into those people who are involved in building infrastructure. Don't just think about arts collectives and arts can be like, who is it just in the arts? Think of who are the architects, who's the lawyers, who's the human justice lawyer? Do you have one? Do you know one? I mean, bridge out, go to different workshops that are just not in the arts to learn about strategies that you have in the arts. Building that capacity can really help sort of get what you need to actually make those buildings happen, make those programs happen.
Thank you so much. That's an interesting way to end and move forward, because this is what we were here. It was the idea of, you know, talking about disability arts, but also how we build our own capacities within our organization, within our practice to represent this particular place. I could talk forever.